compiling, which it is, but we have more news on that. Probably the biggest pain point in C++ is compile time, but we have more news on it. It's a very powerful language, but it can be slow to build. There's a famous XKCD comic about compile speeds that some of you may have seen before, which makes a joke of it. While you're compiling, you might not have much to do, thus sword fights on office chairs. But it's not really a joke because it can be a productivity issue. It's useful to have a fast compile debug cycle so you don't lose your focus or thoughts while trying to solve problems. Or fast builds may allow you to have a better CI setup. We've had a few solutions to this. Compile, which is a great tool and works with BCC64X, CMake and Ninja, as we just spoke about, which is really better or intended for using with third-party libraries because it's what they come with, and in the past, batch compilation with the --jobs parameter. This one sends all the C++ files to the compiler in one go, i.e. batches, and used multiple processors at once, which was jobs. In 12.2 we've brought that back, but it's a completely new implementation. The new batch compilation with jobs is faster than the old version, and it's on by default. This means that just by installing 12.2, next time you compile, you'll get an immediate speed up. No configuration, no settings, no changes, just install 12.2 and it's faster. And it will roughly scale with the number of cores and amount of RAM your machine has. But how much faster? We ran some benchmarks on some synthetic code where we created 5,000 files containing 360,000 lines of code. And we measured compiling this against the classic compiler, Visual C++ with Ninja and with its own version of multiprocessing, our toolchain with Ninja, and the new default. First, Classic is very fast. That's because it does far less, the compiler is far simpler, and the STL available for it is far simpler. And while we strongly encourage you to move away from Classic, we know people still use it because of its compile speed, so it's important to have on this kind of chart. Let's look at Visual C++ used with Ninja, Ninja being the industry standard parallel compilation tool. It takes a bit under 30 seconds. Then let's look at Visual C++ with the /mp flag. This is Microsoft's own version of our --jobs, and shows what may be the best case scenario for Visual C++. It's a lot faster than with Ninja. Now let's look at our new compiler, BCC64X. First, let's look with Ninja. It's faster than Microsoft Visual C++, which is unexpected. We don't currently know why that is, and maybe it's just this codebase. But it's already looking pretty good. Finally, you might detect a trend on the times here where smaller is better, and you can see a direction we're going. So let's look at what we get with the new compiler using our new batch compilation and jobs. Wow! Now this speeds up based on how much it can parallelize, which means you need CPU cores and memory. We tested on a beefy machine, and you can see its hardware on the slide, over a dozen cores and 64 gigs of RAM. But we think it's fair to say that you should get performance improvements over the default compilation by upgrading to 12.2, and we certainly recommend installing it and trying it out. Now, we are still benchmarking. That was synthetic generated code, and we found while I was writing this presentation that code using the STL was slower. And that may be to do with libc++ having many individual files and what are called transitive includes, which is where you include something that includes something that includes something. Or other indications are that it depends on the C++ version you target, especially when comparing against different toolchains. So at this stage, we're still benchmarking and testing, and it is likely that you will not get results completely matching the first benchmark we did with your genuine real-world code. Now that particular benchmark showed that we are faster than other modern toolchains, but other benchmarks are different and we're analyzing that. What we can say is that in some measurements, as you saw, we are faster than the other comparable toolchains we've tested against. What matters is really the performance improvement for your projects. And just because we have this feature on by default, you should see compile times improve by default just by installing and using 12.2. Plus, this effect will be more visible the more files you have, i.e. the larger your project, the more this will be visible, matched with having more cores and RAM. So, stay tuned for a blog on this. Either way, you can tell we're focusing on delivering a really high quality toolchain for you. We've finished the toolchain with dynamic packages. We will have CMake and Get It soon, and we have an inbuilt, on-by-default parallel compile where we expect to see excellent speedups as you scale cores and memory. 12.2 is a really exciting release for C++.
Thanks, David. Now moving to the Delphi compilers, there is one great feature that's available in 12.2. We are shipping the 64-bit version of the Delphi compiler for Win32 and Win64. 64-bit version doesn't mean targeting or building 64-bit application, but it's the compiler itself that is a 64-bit executable, and therefore the compiler is now able to handle extremely large application because it has a huge memory address space compared to the 3 GB that were available on the older 32-bit binaries. We have enabled this feature only for the command line compilers because the IDE cannot invoke a compiler directly, but the compilers are enabled from the IDE when you're using the external MS build. In that case, there is a new feature. You can determine which is your preferred tool architecture and can be 32 or 64-bit. So the goal here is to allow building a very large application with tens of millions of lines of source code as a single executable. And that's also the reason we have made this feature available only in Enterprise and Architect in 12.2. The same option is available also for the Delphi LSP. Because Delphi LSP is a separate executable, it can be activated in the IDE in a version that is built as a 64-bit binary. So both the command line compilers available through MS Build and the Delphi LSP engine are available as 64-bit application. The new C++ compiler, which is also a separate executable, is and has been 64-bit since the release. So now let's move from the compiler to the IDE. And there is one big feature that we're introducing in 12.2. We've called it Smart Code Insight. And it's the ability to use AI LLMs within the RADStudio IDE. Rather than teaming with one individual vendor and one individual company and provide you one specific option, what we've decided to do is to build an open architecture for plugins that are tied to artificial intelligence. The architecture is based on an Open Tools API, and in fact, you can create your own plugins for this architecture. Of course, having only the architecture won't be terribly useful. We are also shipping ready-to-use support for 3 online solutions: the OpenAI API, the Gemini API by Google, and the Claude API by Anthropic. We're also providing one offline solution, offline meaning a solution you can install locally on your machine or a machine in your network, and that solution is Ollama. We are also providing a ready-to-use Docker image that you can install on a Linux machine or you can install on the Windows subsystem for Linux. What's important to underline is that everything is optional and it's disabled by default. You can disable it. You can enable each of the individual engines that you want to use, and you have a license to use. Of course, before you use one of these APIs, you need to create an account on the system, pay for the usage to the vendor. And what you need to do in the configuration page is add some general parameters plus the individual API keys that are provided you once you have an active account. Again, you can choose which providers are active. You can choose the default provider for the operations done in the editor. You can choose the same or a different provider for the chat window available in the IDE. You can decide to disable everything and nothing will happen. You can decide to use only an offline solution that provides you the maximum privacy because there's zero information sent to anyone else on the internet. So that was our approach, and that is the goal of this solution. You decide if and how to use AI, and you decide which of the vendors you want to work with and you trust. That's different from some other IDEs that tend to offer one preferred solution at times made by the same vendor. How does it work in practice? There is a new chat window where you can ask like general purpose questions, ask to generate code for you, ask for anything specific. It's in the IDE, so you can easily copy and paste from that result window into your editor. There's also another option directly tied to the IDE itself, which is the ability to select code in the editor. Could be a function, could be a class, could be an entire unit, and invoke some ready-to-use operations on that code, like find bugs, explain code, add comments, complete the code, optimize, add unit tests, or some conversion function. These are available straight away in the IDE. And this is an example. I've written some clumsy code, clearly wrong code. I hope all of you recognize this as not being a good idea to allocate some memory and just walk away. And not only this was highlighted, I think in this case by ChatGTP, but also there was suggestion to rewrite that code in a different way with a proper try finally block. As I mentioned, that screenshot was captured using ChatGPT. Now let's switch to a different engine and see what happens if I select the same function and I go to the Smart Code inside Options and ask to find bugs in the code. The results are similar, not too surprisingly, although the code is slightly different. Now let me try another option, which is explain code. I found that quite nice. That would be probably good for a beginner to, okay, what is this code? What is this button? What is this button one click? What's happening here? And so it's telling me the type starts a type declaration. tform is a class named tform, which inherits from tform. And button is a public field, likely represent a button control on the form. Yes, that is true. And button click is method fix a parameter and is likely an event handler for the buttons click event, which is actually correct.
Hello again. In 12.1 we introduced split editor views, which have quality work this release by the way, which was a reworking of how the editor can work and be configured within an IDE window, allowing multiple editors. This technology has allowed us to add another new IDE editor feature, and that's focus mode. Focus mode is similar to what's known as Zen mode in other IDEs, but we gave it a different name to avoid any religious terminology and because it is all about focus. The idea is just your code editor. That's it, only code. And we remove most of the IDE UI and even remove other UI, the idea being that it is an IDE mode to use for distraction-free, focused coding. To open focus mode for the current editor, press Ctrl-Alt-Z or use the tab menu. You can see on screen in the background what it looks like in light mode by default. It is full screen with a centered editor. And that's it. You can even, and see the screenshot at the front, reduce editor UI by turning off things like the navigation toolbar or showing the blue dots. Again, the idea is to have a focus on code and remove as much of everything else as is possible and useful to still allow it to be just you and your code. Here's a screenshot in dark mode, which is my favorite way of using it. And note we support split editors in focus mode too, and you can use Ctrl F12 or one of the toolbar buttons at the top to open units. So that's focus mode. Remove distracting UI and have just you and your code. We hope you'll find it useful for those long or complex coding sessions. We have some other really nice additions too. One is scrollbar annotations. You can display bookmarks, changes, highlighted tokens, and compiler errors or warnings on the scrollbar. Of course, it comes with Tools API support and you can draw there too. This is really useful to allow you to see on the scrollbar where something you're interested in is, and jump there quickly. Inline assembly inside Delphi code now supports syntax highlighting. Plus, the code completion dropdown can be drawn using the editor colors, which you may prefer if you use the editor with a very different color scheme to the IDE's surrounding color scheme. Finally, we have a lot of quality work, and that's especially around the split views, plus the way the IDE toolbars behave in high DPI.
Thank you, David. Hello everyone, Nuno here from the PM team. I'm pretty excited to announce that for Visual Assists we have integrated 2 new refactorings, 3 new features, being them introduce variable, create from usage, and extract methods. Plus, we have done some significant quality and stability improvements around the code navigation and code completion. All of this that you'll be able to experience in Write Studio 12.2. And to showcase these 3 new refactorings, let's jump into Write Studio itself and have a demonstration live on how those work. So for this demo, I will be showcasing a pretty simple application that what it does is you input your gross salary and you select your country and it calculates your net amount that you should receive. Just a disclaimer for this demo, every country applies the same flat rate as taxes for simplicity. And as a lot of you know, every time that we are doing codes, not always we do the cleanest of codes, especially when we are doing things for the first time and we are in that flow where we are thinking on what we want to do. And this application was no different. So, for example, here in the calculate net salary event, that is what is run when I click in the calculate salary button. What we are doing here in the first section is to see if any of the boxes, of the edit boxes or the combo box is empty, and it is a validation. So when I look into this method, this is not the most fundamental part of the methods, but is what takes more space and mental space when I look into it. So a good thing for us to do is to extract it to a method for better clarity and readability of these methods. And with VA now we can do this very simple. What we need to do is just to select the entire part that we want to extract. We right click on it, we go to the refactor menu and we click extract methods. In here, Visual Assist presents us with this pop-up that has a few options. First one is to choose the method name, and in this case I'll choose run validations. And then we have a few other options. First is I can choose to not select either of the boxes, and if I click OK, what VA will do is extract this method directly into the header file, the declaration and the source code implementation, but is not what we want in this case. The section option is extract as a free function, and if I select this option, what VA will do is create a function that is not tied to any scope. And the last one, extract to source, is it will extract the function, making the declaration in the header file, and then on the source file the implementation. That is exactly what you want. So let's go and see what happens. I clicked OK, and as you saw, VA created the method for me here in the source file, and on the original methods it changed the lines by calling the function itself. And now if we look into the header file, we will see that it also created the declaration in the header file, just as we expected. And if we run our code, everything will work as expected. The second part that we can showcase is, for example, in this showcase, in this show message, we notice that we have this line here. This line is calculating the net salary. However, just for reading it is very difficult to understand, and it will be easier if we have a named variable for it. So let's go ahead and do it. Refactor, introduce variable, and I'll call it net salary. And now VA created the variable for me in the innermost scope. That is exactly what I wanted. And once again, if you look at the method, now it's much easier to read. So it will run some validations, it will then calculate the net salary, and then it will show the net salary as a pop-up message. And if we run the code, we will see that everything works as expected. And now the last but not least we will look into create from usage. So let's say that every country now decided to apply a flat rate of taxes, and we want to add it to our calculator. We can go here, we add a new flat rate, but as you might have noticed, this flat rate is not declared anywhere. So if we try to compile, it will fail. However, VA is very clever and can do something for you. So you can right click on an undefined symbol, you go refactor, create from usage, and you can choose to create a new, in this case, variable for an undefined symbol. And for this case, what I will want is to create a global variable. I will make it a const and click OK. And
in web broker or RAD server, and you merge into a template, into a skeleton, data that is available within the application itself. You can use it to build any modern website using any JavaScript library, any type of cascaded style sheet, and basically any web technology. The idea is that you extract data in a RADStudio server-side application, process and merge it with HTML. There are many template libraries out there. It's not a new technology, but it's the first time that a library like this is available directly in RADStudio. One thing that we want to highlight is that this can be really a great foundation for building HTMX applications. It's a new library that is growing and very interesting. HTMX pages benefit from server-side code generation. They're really declarative in their approach compared to JavaScript-based libraries where you have JavaScript code that is more procedural than declarative. What you can see here is an example of a very nice HTMX application built with web stencils I'll get to in a minute. What is a template library? It's a scripting engine that uses a specific syntax. It uses the add symbol to indicate special processing elements, blocks, variables, or keywords. And then it uses angle brackets to define a block of code. It also supports simple expressions. Let me just show you a very, very simple demo. In the code, you can have an object, in this case, this simple object with a name and a value, and you give it a name, object2, and make this object available to the processor. In the HTML, you can have two different things. One is you can access to information like that add object2.name or add object2.value, or you can invoke access properties and operations within a conditional statement, that value below 10. This is conditional. The concept here is that that HTML snippet that you're seeing at the bottom will be visible if the value within that object is less than 10. Otherwise, that entire if block will be omitted and you'll only have the header without any HTML content. So not only you can replace values, but you can also have a logic that enables or disables sections of your HTML depending on actual data and logic within your Delphi or C++ builder application. How do you access the data? It can be RTTI based as I was showing earlier, so object dot property. There is an onValue event handler, which allows you for a lot of flexibility. So when you say add object dot value, you have an onValue event handler that provides you as parameters the string object, the string value, and up to you to do any processing you like. The idea, you can register objects, you can register lists of objects, you can register entire data sets. And when you have a data set registered, you can navigate through the records using for each loop, like in this other small code snippet. In this case, I have a for each dataset, where dataset is an object registered with the name dataset. And then I access to some of the fields like company, country, city, state, and so forth. You can also define module variables that are available for all scripts in a web module. Let me explain a little better the previous example. This is a web broker application. It has an action. The action allows you to associate a path /list to some code that needs to be executed. The code to be executed is that action. So what we're doing here, we're opening a data set. We are registering that data set with the name dataset, and then we are processing the file associated with this web stencil processor component. And in the file, there is the code that was already on the previous page. For each data set, read some of the fields. This is what you do in a simple scenario. In more complex scenarios, both web broker and web server offer a way to do a direct mapping. So associate a number of different URLs with a number of different files according to high-level roles and logic. Before I go to the next slide and provide you a couple of more details, let's actually show quickly a demo in action. This is the demo I was actually showing earlier. There are a number of actions, each mapped to a different URL. There are a number of web stencil processor components. For example, company list, which is associated with this company list HTML. There is the action event handler for company list, which is the code I was showing earlier. And then there is the HTML, which provides the skeleton of the page. Now, this is not a full complete page. The reason is that one of the features of HTML templates is that they allow you to separate the content of the page with the structure of the page. In this case, the structure is in the layout called base template, which is here. This is a standard bootstrap-based page with some styles and other information that's not terribly important to look at now, a menu and so forth. And then in one location of the template says render body. So that means, oh, now let's add the actual specific page content here. You can have multiple templates and each page has a reference to one of the templates. The net result is an application that lets you open in the browser and get a list of companies. And then I'm not going to show you the code for each company to access to specific information. And also that if test we were looking at earlier. Now let me cover a couple of more things quickly. We can really go in depth into all of the features of web stencils in this launch webinar. There is a query keyword to access any of the HTTP parameters. There is ability to add comments. There are if statement, including if not and if else options. There are two different syntax for each object, or the ability to define a local variable name for the objects in the list. This allows you to create nested for each loops. There is the ability to import a code snippet within any existing template and file, and the ability to scaffolding, which is something I'm going to omit for now. In terms of template, as I was showing earlier, you can indicate in a file, which is the layout, which is the template. Within the template, you can indicate where to place the actual content. There is the ability to inject extra headers in the template, and of course the ability to indicate where those extra headers need to be rendered. Headers regularly go within the header section of your HTML. Last thing I want to mention, there are two main components. There is a web stencils processor, allows you to process an individual file as I was showing earlier, but there's also an engine component that allows you to define a web dispatch mapping with WebRocker or RAD server. Allows you to define the fault directory for all of the files and define mapping logic from incoming URLs into the actual files to be used for processing. With this, let me show you a final, nicer demo of Web Stencils. This demo is built as a console app, and this demo would work both on Windows and Linux. So what I need to do is actually start the server, and now I can hook a browser. Once you connect to this demo, you can see a number of different use case scenarios. It's a very extensive demo. What I'm only going to focus is the examples. This is an example of a very large page with 1,000 records from randomly generated customers. And you can see it's very fast. It's also very fast to generate the page, merging the 1,000 records into the HTML. The other demo, this demo shows a list of tasks where you can create a new task and add it to the list. You can delete. Fairly complete, nice looking web application built completely using HMX and using Web Stencils on the server. Now there's another feature I want to mention in terms of library improvements, and that's for mobile development for Delphi. For the Apple platform, we have updated the linker to the most recent version Apple provides, and the big advantage there is that we can now link static libraries on iOS, for including, for example, the Firebase iOS SDK. On Android, we've added a number of features to the deployment process, including the ability to compress DAX files and compress native libraries. These are all options in the RStudio IDE now. Also, you can customize the target SDK version rather than having a single value hard-coded, and you can change directly in the manifest file. Now, it can be configured in the IDE. Also, the ability to import Android libraries or .aar files, which allows you, for example, to import the Facebook SDK for Android or the Firebase Analytics by Google. And with that, let's focus on some quality areas in RStudio 12.2.
Among the other quality improvements that we put into 12.2, which we'll talk about in a moment, we've focused on debugger quality. There are several improvements in the various RStudio debuggers, and the Delphi debugger now handles repeated inline variables with the same name, which was a problem before. We've also improved the debugger error handling and the remote debugger's communication timeouts. We're focusing on quality, and these are the kind of quality of life improvements, but just general quality improvements we put into 12.2.
For Delphi LSP quality, before we jump into what we have done for 12.2, I would like to share that the team is very committed in bringing code completion, code navigation, and code formatting to the highest standard possible. We are putting our focus mainly into those three areas for LSP. This version for 12.2, we had a lot in our hands with the 64-bit version of LSP, but we didn't want to leave any of these areas untouched. So we have made a few improvements where, for example, now symbol ints will work in the class interface, including fields. Hovering over local constants and variables will now resolve their definitions. And the engine will now be able to also resolve forward type declarations. Probably in most cases, but at the moment not in all cases. The team is very happy also to share that we have done some internal tools that will help us identify problems with the LSP and to help identify regressions before we put them live. So we are very focused on trying to bring LSP to the highest standards possible, and I hope that everyone will be able to enjoy what we'll do and what we have done so far. Over to Marco now.
Thanks, Nuno. Let me finish by going over a few additional quality areas in RStudio 12.2. For the Delphi RTL, besides addressing some quality tickets, we've added 3 small new features. There is a new parallel array class that allows you to do parallel operations like sorting on an array. This can make sorting 2 or 3 times faster. There's a new t-order dictionary, and there is support for the reg_none type in the registry. That's a key with no type. That's a feature of the Windows API that is now surfaced in the t-registry class. For VCL, the main focus was on quality work around frame scaling, around the new forms tab bar component introduced in 12.0, styling issues, and high DPI issues. The work was quite extensive, and we're very happy of the outcome. Notice that some of these improvements also positively affect the IDE, which is using the VCL with styling and high DPI. For FireMonkey, we did the work on Android deployment, as mentioned earlier. Also, a lot of quality work in many areas. Main focus still T80 and memo controls on mobile. We have refactored them for desktop and now also for mobile across the various 12x releases. So lots of work happening on FireMonkey to improve the quality and stability of the library across all supported platforms. Talking about RAD server, there is one significant improvement, which is the web stances integration. RAD server was mainly focused on web service development. Now you can do web development with RAD server. We have reworked the push notification, supporting Firebase for both iOS and Android. This requires support for HTTP2 that was missing. Notice that to enable it on Windows, you need to use libcurl and not the native Windows library. We've also worked a lot in improving the Swagger documentation, the API documentation that's automatically generated by RAD server, in terms of providing customization of some of the metadata, filtering of the APIs you want to document, support for YAML in addition to JSON, and also enable the use of multi-line string literals in some of the attributes. With that, I want to highlight the fact that quality overall took a lot of focus and attention, despite this webinar was focused primarily on the new features added. We addressed approximately 350 customer reported issues across the various subsystems. We've implemented almost 30 feature requests. These are tickets that have been reported on the old or the new quality portal for customers. And in terms of focus areas, the largest number of tickets was addressed in the IDE, VCL and FireMonkey. We also addressed a number in the C++ and Delphi compilers and in the Delphi runtime library. And with that, we can open the webinar for questions.
Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing my video. And okay, so welcome back, everyone. I'm going to turn my camera on. Let me make sure I've got the right camera. Yes, I have. And by the way, in the background there, I just want to point out, when I went to Brazil, someone gave me it was Landerson Gomez actually, gave me a special 12.2 Brazilian soccer team shirt. So very impressive. Thanks a lot, Landerson. Really appreciate that. We've got lots and lots of questions. Is Kyle and David and Nuno there as well? Let's hope. Guys, can you?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you can. There you go. David, are you going to turn your camera on, or are you choosing not to?
Look, I've had a bit of a light touch of the flu this week, and I'm going to keep my camera off if that's all right.
Yeah, we don't want to scare everybody. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, I'm on my desktop and I don't have any camera on this one. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. Okay, Carl, do you want me to drive the questions, or do you want to do them, or?
Yeah, do you want to, I mean, I think let's just start with the most repeated question, install process. How do we get our hands on 12.2?
Who wants to answer that? So
I can. It's easy. Just go to, if you don't have a license, just go to embarcadero.com and download a trial. If you do have a license, go to my.embarcadero.com and you can download the installer for version 12.2. it should be there ready for you. We have officially released 46 minutes ago. Well, it was actually online a few minutes earlier. So it is there, the product, the information about the new features. At times, actually significantly more extensive than what we could cover is available on DocWiki. So just docwiki.mercurial.com, you can navigate to Athens, and there is a what's new in 12.2 page with a lot of details and links to in-depth pages providing like detailed coverage of the new feature. So it is there, it is live, you can install it. Someone was writing in the questions, I'm downloading it. So not really a question.
They can't wait to get their hands on it. And actually, another question that came up, and I did answer it, but I'll just answer it again. People say, do I need to uninstall 12.1 before I uninstall 12.2? Actually, if you install 12.2, it will automatically uninstall. It will say, hang on, I'm going to uninstall. And by the way, it does take a little while, so don't do it if you're planning on doing some work in the next 20, 30 minutes, because it takes a while. But it will automatically uninstall. But because it's an upgrade, when 12.2 starts, you'll find that pretty much everything that you had there before will still be working. That's my experience. I don't have all the different add-ons and extensions and libraries. So generally things like, I think, actually, I don't think there are any exceptions. I think if you install 12.2, then it will just work out the box on top of the 12.1 with everything you had installed before. So all your lovely component sets and everything. And we haven't had we had a question as well about does that mean that my components for 12.1 work with 12.2? I've not heard of any that don't. They are binary compatible. There could be something odd that's happening in the component libraries, but generally speaking, yes, they will work out of the box. And we actually allow our tech partners early access to betas and things like that to work through any issues that we've got. So looking good. Right, so a couple of questions for David, I think. Sorry to put you on the spot, David. I think you've answered most of them. Let me just see. David, is C++ 20 supported with the new compiler?
So our official support is C++ 17. Now we're using Clang 15, and that means libc++ 15 and so forth, and they do support some C++ 20 and some C++ 23 features. By default, when you compile, we pass the C++ 17 flag. What we're planning to do is upgrade Clang further, and then when we have a newer version of Clang, we'll support C++ 20 officially as the default. And I imagine in a year or so, once C++ 23 evens out, we will make C++ 23 the default and so forth. But yeah, right now C++ 17 is the default. There are command line parameters you can pass to try to use what's available in version 15 though, if you want to give that a go.
Yeah, and a lot of love for the speed.
Not officially supported.
Yeah, a lot of love for the speed graph that you showed, and it is a big deal for us. We talked about it internally. It's like anything. If you get the right project and it's got certain things, then it's not going to be as fast as another one that just happens to be better at doing that particular project. But certainly the initial test that we did, it shows how fast it is. It's definitely up there with anybody else, and in some cases much faster as well. Am I speaking out of turn there, David, or is that correct?
No, look, I try to emphasize we're still doing benchmarks, and I need to have some good conversations with our engineers to understand the benchmarks and know what's going on. So take everything that I say now as provisional, and we're looking into it. But we completely redid the parallelization system, and it's a lot more efficient. And so we think that the first chart that I showed you is because it was with synthetic code, and that's very simple code. We generated a lot of code, but when it was generated, it was quite simple. So what you're seeing there is the benefit of the really amazing new parallelization system, just showing just how fast it can grab code and deal with it. And then when we throw real-world code at it, real-world code does lots of complex things, and sometimes, especially with the STL, there are quirks in the STL that have overhead, and they bring it slower again. But we can definitely say even with that, we seem to be on par with other tool chains. And it's difficult to compare because we get very different results comparing against Visual C++ if we turn it into C++ 14 mode versus 17 mode, for example. So still looking into this. But we're definitely very good. Really, what I just want to have as the main takeaway is, we've been really visibly trying to produce something good quality for you, and I think we've communicated that over the past few releases, and I hope that's really visible here. And regardless of where we stand with other tool chains, and I would love if we were the best in the world, but I can't promise you that yet. Regardless of where we stand with other tool chains, the hope is that because we have this in the product and on by default, if you just compiled and you used the normal compilation in 12.1, and you now install 12.2 and use the normal compilation, it'll scale by your CPU cores and RAMs, it'll be faster. If you're using something like Twine compile, then worst case is that is on par. But basically, by default, out of the box, hugely better. That's the main message I want to get across.
Cool. Okay, this is a question for Carl. I'll put him on the spot, just as he is the general manager, and therefore this is a kind of a management question, but it's more of a policy question. I know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. We get people asked quite often about roadmaps. We always say the same thing, but I'll just let Carl reiterate Idera's policy on roadmaps. And since Idera are effective, they own the company, then it's our policy on roadmaps, because they tell us what to do.
Yeah, so I mean, as far as do we have a roadmap? Yes. Can we share everything that's on that? No. What our goal has been is to share a little bit more frequently kind of what we're working on. That's kind of a middle ground approach that we've taken to say, hey, this is like some of these things, for example, are nods in the direction of things that you might be asking for, but they are setting us up for future items on that roadmap. As to when we're able to deliver those, that is the big question mark and asterisk, so to speak. So we are, being a little bit conservative here, as we want to deliver what we say we're going to deliver and deliver it on time for you. So stay tuned for more, what's coming webinars, things like that. Those will be the best source of information there. If there's specifics, if something is a huge business need for you that you're waiting on, feel free to reach out to us directly, and we can potentially give you more insight into that. But in a public forum like this, certainly something that's going to be circulated time and time again. We want to be, pretty clear on what we're delivering is what we're delivering today. What's coming in the future, we'll discuss when the future is closer.
Yeah, and I've answered this question as well to people and saying, look, the thing about Idera is that they own a lot of companies, and they're in a lot of different markets and a lot of different territories around the world. And if you think about the bigger picture, there are a lot of different laws and regulations and compliances and things that you need to adhere to. And whilst, if you were focused in just one country, you could just follow that country's rules and regulations and be 100% safe that you could say what you liked and know that you'd be compliant with the laws and regulations. But when you're as big as Idera, you're facing very diverse sets of rules and regulations. And so as much as we want to go, here's a great big chart that shows you everything that we're planning, it's not as simple as that. And I have some sympathy with them. PMs and myself would rather have that big roadmap, but it is a bit more of a more complex picture than I think people appreciate as well. So thanks for that, Carl.
I'll just say quickly, you're all the developers here, so things happen. You plan, you do as much prep work as you can to prevent any issues, but issues still arise. Sometimes we're able to get through those issues prior to release. That happened on this release. There were some items that we thought were going to push to later than the release, but we were able to get those in. Had we promised those on date of delivery, et cetera, we would have put ourselves in a situation where you wouldn't have been happy, we wouldn't have been happy. We're not happy with some of the way the development cycles work, but we work through those with our team. So anyway, you understand how those things happen, and we don't want to lock ourselves into something that ultimately could be out of our control. So anyway.
Yeah. So this is a question for
sorry, there's one thing I wanted to add about roadmap. So roadmaps are not secret, although they're not public. It's an in-between. What I would recommend for any question, and I'm seeing some popping up which are interesting and are absolutely appropriate, like understanding what the future investments in Delphi compared to C++. What I would recommend is to reach out to Ian, to one of the PMs. We can have a one-to-one conversation with customers. If you don't have any license, haven't bought one for many years, well, maybe sales, but otherwise, if you are an active customer, we are more than willing to have a call, explain you what we are doing, and have a conversation about plans and roadmaps, but in a format that is not just showing what is in our plans, but also and importantly asking you what you want us to do for our plan. So it becomes more of a conversation than us saying this is what you're doing. And so we really encourage you to reach out, and marco.cantu@embarcadero.com, and same for everyone else. As first, not last name at the company. Just reach out, and we have a lot of conversation with customers, and more than happy to set up something with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I give out my email all the time. I probably won't be able to answer questions, but I will know who to ask, and that's the important thing. So, I've emphasized this before. Embarcadero is not a black box. You have faces you can associate with the company. You have people you can email directly. If you're unhappy or happy about something, or you've got a really great idea, reach out to us. I mean it. We are not a company. We know that when you are using RAD Studio to develop software, we're sitting there at the desk with you, virtually, not real, but we're sitting there with you. And so when you're writing code, it's a very personal interaction. If something's not right, if you want the IDE to do something better or worse or differently, we know it's personal, and we take it personally in the company. I've never worked at a company before that's so engaged in what the product is and the quality and all the other things as well. So, reach out to us. I mean, we're here. That's literally what my job is there for, to interact with you. Anyway, let's ask, I've got a lot of questions for David, but I've also got some from Marco. Marco, for web stencils, can you just briefly go over, where was that question? Unfortunately, it scrolled off. Thank you, go to webinar. I shall curse you in my sleep. They were talking about how you define objects in web stencils. Can you just give a brief kind of like Web Stencils 101 again, just to explain?
Sure. So, yeah, there are multiple things you can do. In short, the idea is that in the script you have references to objects, to symbols that could map directly to objects you have in memory. So I think I showed object2.name, and so object2 could be an object. It doesn't mean the variable is called object2. It means you have a variable and you register it to the scripting as, refer to this as object2. And a name is just a property. So that's a way to resolve the at notation. It's an object registered and a property, but it could also be a data set registered and the field. You don't have to, you can decide if you want to create an object layer just directly against data sets. It's up to you. How is that registered? Either before running the script, you say these are the objects I want to use, or you can have a general registration, like whenever I'm using these web modules, I want to have these objects, data sets, lists of object lists are very important. Also, these are all available. But that's not the only way. There is another option you have in terms of resolving a symbol to some data, which is using an event handler. There is an onValue event handler. The onValue event handler receives two parameters, the name of the object, the name of the field. So how you do the mapping, it's 100% your code. It's just an event, so you can do it. And you can have the event for the specific script being executed, or you can have a global event for all of your scripts at the engine level. So if there is no event for the script, and there is an engine associated, it's going to use the engine. So you can have a single onValue event for the entire application, say, okay, this is how I do all of my mapping. So it is extremely open-ended, it's extremely flexible. Yeah, it is. I kind of. It's not called out specifically. It's a non-opinionated library, so there's not like one way to use it or one right way to use it. It has multiple options built in, so it's up to you to determine what's the approach you want to use for a specific project.
Yeah, and I think it was Walter Verhoeven actually who mentioned. He said, "Oh, it's similar to Razor." The answer is yeah, it's similar to Razor because Razor is a template engine, and of course, I mean, there's similarities, but there are also other templating engines out there. It's not a new idea. Konrad Vermeulen, one of our excellent MVPs, and has demonstrated his own Semper template engine, which is different, works in a different way, but does some very credible things. Got some absolutely gorgeous user interface with it. But this is Web Stencils is our idea behind it, and has got some very specific use cases. Someone asked about slides and examples, so I'll just lead on from that. The answer is yes, we will make the slides available, and we also have some examples already for Web Stencils, and there's a lot more coming up. We are planning a webinar, and in fact a couple of webinars with an MVP who's working on some material in connection with Web Stencils. They used Web Stencils early on, were excited about what it did, so much so that they've really focused heavily on that. I can't go into the details of what they're doing, but we're going to have some webinars very specifically to show you how to make Web Stencils fly. If you want to do web development with Delphi and Rad Studio, there you go. You can create the templates, get your web designer to do all sorts of exciting and beautiful things with CSS and all the other things that you need to do, and then patch it. Use Web Stencils to throw that HTML page onto the screen in a very, very profound and gorgeous way. I showed some slides in Brazil that were out of the park, fantastic. It's a very exciting feature. I think it's great. I'm looking forward to doing some demos with it. Okay, so and by the way, a replay was the other question, which is kind of linked to what they were saying about slides. If you've signed up for this webinar, you will automatically get an email with the replay link, but we'll make sure it's on our YouTube and LinkedIn and all the other channels as well. Don't worry, you won't escape. You will get the replays. So yeah. Oh, and yes, Carl was mentioning that it's to do with WebBroker as well. So yeah, there's different technologies in the background. So okay.
Yeah, also a question about WebBroker. I mean, WebBroker is a core foundation. It's really a bare-bone library that allows to bridge between different web technologies, like Indie standalone or integration with Apache, integration with Internet Information Server, and it does it very well. Now, it doesn't do a lot, but it does that foundation very well. In fact, DataSnap and Rad Server, they're all based on that foundation, and there are also a lot of third-party libraries based on the same foundation. Now, we could expand it, and yeah, we have some plans to expand it in terms of supporting natively other more recent, more modern web solutions and web architectures. And the other thing, probably providing a bit more like core features, that like basic features that you might want to expect. Although again, there are other tools on top of WebBroker that already provide a lot of capabilities. But what was the relation with Web Stencils and WebBroker? The concept about there are two main concepts in WebBroker. One is that there is an action architecture. You associate an action with which is basically a URL to either some code on action that you execute, or directly to a component that can generate. It's called page producer interface. If a component implements that interface, it can generate the result. And you guess what? The Web Stencils producer is a producer that you can just hook to the action, and the result will just show up as an HTML result. The other thing, it has a concept of implementing like rather than a single URL, like an entire mapping layer, dispatcher, and the Web Stencils engine component is a dispatcher. So basically, you drop it into a broker, and it kind of takes over And all of the processing for path and so forth, or the mapping of path to file, path to script, it's all done by the engine. So it is a huge extension to web broker, but you can use the same exact technologies in DataSnap if you want. And we have specifically enabled the same logic of mapping in RAD server, which provides some advantages in terms of performance, overall features. But again, the web stencil extension is available across all of the web frameworks that ship with RAD Studio.
Yeah, and in fact, Antonio, one of our colleagues, Antonio Zapata, who's a very, very smart developer, if you go on the blog, you'll see examples of him using HTMX, and he has examples of work with web stencils as well with HTMX. HTMX is the favorite framework for everybody at the moment. I really like it. I think it's very powerful, and there's some controversy about, oh, it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that, but actually it's extremely powerful way of getting pages that are very dynamic with very little pull on the server, and not having to redraw sections and things like that. The web stencils works with all that kind of idea, because the web stencils templates are just HTML pages. So if you really wanted to, you could get a web designer to design all the templates, and then you can do all your Delphi coding in the background. You're in an environment that's familiar with you, for you, and your web designers in an environment that's familiar with them. It's a perfect match. Does it replace things like IntraWeb and TMS Web Core? No, it's a different idea. IntraWeb is one particular way of doing things. TMS Web Core, which I personally love both those frameworks, is another way of doing things. The same with UniGUI and a few of the other web frameworks. What we're doing is just adding another way of trying to get to the web, because obviously, you know, modern technology means that the web is a significant and important part of the software development environment nowadays, and it's important that we are relevant and we maintain our relevance, and that's what we do. We try and make sure that, you know, we're doing the things that make sense for our customers and our future customers as well as our existing customers. Okay, so some C++ questions. These are for David and Nuno. I think Nuno and David can work out which ones answer which. So one of the questions, I can't remember whether you answered this, but if are all these C++ packages present